Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you could join us for this evening's and this afternoon's, depending on where you are, webinar. As you're all logging on, it's kind of fun if you would like in the chat to say where you're from. And remember, if you go to the chat, you can choose either to everyone or to host and panelists. So if you click everyone, then we all get to see, and it's kind of fun. I am Sarah Colber. I'm with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and I'm just west of Ottawa in the Lanark County area. Okay, great. I see some people. Ottawa, Ajax, Maple Ridge, BC, Alberta. Oh my gosh, there's so many of you. Vancouver, Smithers, Manitoba, Toronto, Victoria, Nova Scotia. Yeah, really nice mix. I love it when we get to see so many people from across the country. Oh, so cool. Saskatchewan, Timmins, Victoria. Going so fast, I don't dare say some of those places out loud because I don't know how to pronounce them. Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. So while you're joining in, and again, welcome everybody who's just joining in now, please feel free in the chat to say where you're from. Make sure you say to everyone if you want everyone to see. I'll just go over a bit of housekeeping. This is being recorded, so don't feel obliged to take a bazillion notes. There will be a replay link that gets sent out in a follow-up Zoom email a few days after this event. I'm not sure how quickly we get the video formatted and how quickly I can create the email, but 2 or 3 days afterwards, you'll get an email. So don't worry about that. Questions, if you could please put all your questions in the Q&A, because that way at the end of Kristen's presentation, I can just have one spot to go through as many of them as possible, and then we'll see how we can get done that way. So more people are still signing on. That's great. Welcome. Okay, I'll just move on a little bit. So as mentioned, I'm Sarah Colber. I'm with the Canadian Wildlife Federation's Gardening for Wildlife program. And we are a national charitable organization that has been around for over 60 years now, doing a variety of work for wildlife and wildlife habitats, whether it's working with policymakers or doing research or doing educational events such as this. So this is great that you're here to join us tonight or this afternoon. Okay, so I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, and that I respect the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across this land. And I often say for these webinars, it's a neat tie into the program, Gardening for Wildlife, because here we are across the country, doing our best to love the land, to respect the land, to appreciate it, to give back, just like the Indigenous people have been doing for eons. So that's perfect. And I'm so happy that you're here today because it's a very fascinating topic, a very pertinent topic that so many people are very excited about. So I'm very glad that Kristen Miskelly is here to join us for this talk on native plant garden design for beauty and habitat. So just a little bit about Kristen. She operates Satin flower nurseries, native plant seeds, and consulting in Victoria, British Columbia. The nursery inspires and empowers people to connect with nature through native plants. Kristen is a biologist passionate about native plants, ecology, ecosystem restoration, and native plant propagation. Her work is focused on the prairie oak ecosystems of southern Vancouver Island, and the Gulf Islands. Kristen provides ecological consultation to various agencies and groups and teaches courses and workshops on native plants, propagation, and local ecology regularly. Kristen is a lecturer at the University of Victoria in biology and the School of Environmental Studies. So welcome, Kristen. I'm really happy to have the likes of you share your knowledge with us this evening. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so you can share yours, and I'll mute myself and hand it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that nice welcoming, and you're an amazing organizer, and I appreciate how well taken care of I've been through this invitation. I'm super excited. We have such an excellent turnout. That means a lot. It says a lot about the passion and interest for nature and native plants. And I really hope that our conversation tonight helps move us further in that direction, and we come away feeling even more inspired to work with the native plants of whatever region that you might be calling in from tonight. We are going to, I would love a chance to just introduce the nursery that I co-operate with my husband, James, to start us off, and it will help transition us into chatting about the importance of native plants briefly. And then we'll dive into considerations around when you're gardening with native plants. Also looking at gardening goals, and we're going to go through project examples, and that's really going to be the body of what we talk about tonight, in linking up some of our garden design principles with garden examples. So here's a map showing you where I am right now. So I'm just circling here. I'm on the southeastern part of Vancouver Island. And for folks away from British Columbia, sometimes Vancouver and Victoria get, mixed up with each other. But just to point out that we're on Vancouver Island at the southeastern tip. I'm calling in from an area called Mechosin, and throughout the Victoria area, we're part of the unceded Coast Salish territories. And in Mechosin, that is Chanu First Nation territory, and also shared territories with Sauk First Nation and Lekwungen speaking peoples, including Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. Our region has amazing diversity of habitat types. So we're characterized by dry coastal Douglas fir forests that are open woodlands with characteristic species like Douglas fir and arbutus, with an understory of a variety of forbs and ferns and grasses. There's wetland habitat in a variety of forms, everything from wet meadow to ponds and lakes, marshes, swamps, etc. And some of the most characteristic features are Garry oak ecosystems or prairie oak ecosystems that sometimes have Garry oak trees in them, but not all the time, but do include the characteristic Garry oak trees, and a rich assemblage of wildflowers that are associated with these ecosystem types. And of course, there's so much variation within prairie oak habitat. These are the habitats that we're going to focus on tonight that are inspiring the plantings that we're going to use as examples this evening. And we are an island, so of course the beautiful Pacific Ocean coastline plays an incredibly important role in the flora here. And the reason we have these beautiful meadows is a whole concert of things going on. One of which is we're in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountain Range, but these lands and habitat here have been stewarded by Indigenous peoples for thousands and thousands of years, since the last glaciation. And particularly through the role of fire and other activities have really been a co-evolution of ecosystems with people. And this plays an incredibly important role in the ecosystems we have and how they're stewarded, and of course the native plants within them. So our nursery, Satin Flower Nurseries, we're really focused on just everything we can do to help reduce barriers to restoration in our region. And we're really focused on southeastern Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands off the coast between us and the mainland. Our nursery in Victoria, again, is part of unceded Coast Salish territories, but of the Wasanich peoples, and that includes Paucachin, Sayout, Sartlup, Wasakum, and Malahat First Nations. Our nursery does like lots of partnerships and involvement with Indigenous communities, and the plants that we're growing are vital to those communities and have been stewarded by those communities for thousands of years. Our nursery has 3 branches, one of which is education, like the tech sort of thing we're doing tonight, and bigger consults with like restoration-based consults with a variety of partners. We're also open 5 days a week for people just to come by and look at native plants or buy native plants, and being open to the general public is a big part of what we do, making plants accessible to people. And we also grow seeds or produce seeds. So a couple glimpses at the nursery, lots of different pot sizes, many different kinds of species, and also forms of plants that we grow. So we'll grow in plugs for some of our restoration projects and sell them as retail as well, and then potted plants. And these different kinds of ways of potentially planting play well into different kinds of garden design. You can imagine if you were working on a larger project, even if it were private land, that a smaller unit or plug could be really helpful in planting a larger area economically. And we'll talk a little bit more about approaches with planting in plugs and pots and seeds and so on in a moment. So here's a glimpse at our seed field. So we have about an acre in seed production for different native species. And these are the way the seeds or the propagules of what we grow in the nursery. So these plants are all local genetics to our region and all local species to our region. And then we grow them in clusters to be able to collect for propagation. And they are so beautiful just to look at. I just love being in the seed fields and working on these. Gardening with native plants is a wonderful way to bridge and connect us to nature, to actually touch these plants and to see them so close to home, embedded in our own gardens. It's such an enriching experience, and learning about the plants from across all their life phases. And I really think it is a way of celebrating the ecology and the flora and fauna of the place you live, and respecting the interconnectedness between wildlife and plants. And we truly are all an important part of conserving nature, and planting native plants is such a tangible way of connecting and helping nature along and celebrating what we have. In addition to respecting biological diversity, there's also a consideration for Indigenous peoples' culture, food systems, and a respect for the land stewardship and management activities that Indigenous people have and continue to play with native plants and nature and habitat in general. Planting with native plants is also extremely wildlife friendly. These are plants that have co-evolved with wildlife, including pollinators and birds and other kinds of insects over huge periods of time. And because of this, they can provide the best nutrition and resources for wildlife. And to see that response from wildlife, even with a small number of native plants, is really amazing. If you are planting a home garden of native plants, you can think about it as helping with a patchwork of habitat. So this can help increase the effective size of surrounding habitat and create corridors and continuity for wildlife to travel to and from. And that teaching us about nature and benefiting future generations is a huge part of this, just that hands-on experience, which garners respect for the these species and habitats and enriches a whole range of experiences, like just going for hikes and starting to recognize what you see, for example. In thinking about gardening with native plants, starting outside is in a natural area is really the best place to be. So all these regions that I'm just amazed at the diversity of regions people are here from. So you can just think about the places you could go, the local forest or the local wetland, or maybe it's going to a nearby park with a volunteer group, but starting to look up close at some of these plants and also the associated wildlife. And really, when we're talking about gardening with native plants, sometimes you're including one or two different kinds of native plants into an existing garden that's predominantly non-native plants. And sometimes you could be changing your garden completely into something that's almost entirely native, and both are very beneficial. So I know that a lot of folks will definitely want to keep areas of their lawn or plants that they are beloved to them, and I think there's nothing wrong with that as long as the plants that you're keeping are not invasive species. So to encourage you not to plant or keep non-native invasive species that may impact natural areas negatively. So our ways of exploring nature can be so different. That could be, taking notes, drawings, using a helpful app like iNaturalist. It is a wonderful app that can help you figure out the identification of your species and also cataloging what's in your area, referring to local nature books of your area, just going for walks and that sort of thing, and sort of learning through osmosis is wonderful. And you just start to recognize the entities around you, even if you can't name them. And I think volunteering is just a spectacular way to start to get a better idea of what's around you. And this really does become sort of nature by design. This can help you understand plant communities that you might group together in a garden, and to learn about the habitat features that support different species and what might work for them in a garden setting in terms of moisture and light and soils. Some of the considerations in plantings, there's so many of them, so I'm just highlighting a few here, but this photo is showing a school garden. We did this with a local municipality. It's on a boulevard. So some of the things we might think about here are traffic considerations in terms of plant heights, friendliness to children, to pets, all those sorts of things, proximity to the road and sidewalk, aesthetics, being so visible and at the side of the road like this. So these are all the sorts of considerations that you might make depending on the site that you are using. So that's kind of the land use aspects, and also who's involved. What kinds of interests do the different parties have? So that can become complex in a public space, and private land can be simpler in some ways, but if you're working on a boulevard or something like that, you might think about your local boulevard guidelines for your municipality and read through those and make sure you're not, or to make sure you're following what your district is asking you to do, to at least to some extent. Also thinking about what Indigenous territory you might be on if you're a non-Indigenous person, and how that might influence your plantings and choices and where you might plant. And a variety of site considerations. But with one of the biggest things to be thinking about are your project goals. So you can't plant every single native plant in a single spot. And so starting that process of elimination can be really helpful. And starting with project goals are things like, are you passionate about hummingbirds and you really want to attract a lot of hummingbirds? Or is it that you have a waterway or a creek and the water's flowing too fast, and how can you slow that water down? So sketching out your project goals can be really helpful and help guide what you're planting. Some of the site feature characteristics include soil, and this might be where you have a very loamy soil and you're in shade, so you may use a local forest or woodland to help you figure out what to plant. Maybe you're in sunny clay soils that have standing water in the winter, and then it dries up to a baking clay. And instead of automatically thinking you have bad soil and need to amend it, maybe you can think about what plants are adapted to those soil types that you could plant. And it doesn't, you can mend soil to, create an environment that's suitable to a suite of species you've pre-selected, but sometimes working in the other direction can be helpful. Looking at your site features and working with them instead of needing to heavily modify. Watering is tightly correlated with the kind of plants you're putting in. So remember when we were looking at the pot sizes and we looked at plugs, and we also looked at 10-centimeter pots. So this size, and there's also of course plants much larger than that in 1 gallons, 2 gallons, 5 gallons, etc. And depending on the time of year you plant and the size of plant you plant can make watering, you might have to water a large plant that doesn't have a large shoot to root or a large root to shoot ratio. So maybe it doesn't have it has a big above ground biomass, but not a lot of root. Then you might have to water those for 1 to 2 years. And if you're planting in the summer, you might have to water, but had you planted in the fall, maybe you wouldn't need to. So an example would be planting plugs or a small pot of a wildflower in fall would mean that it had time to establish roots through fall and winter, and then go on to bloom through spring and summer without supplemental watering. So it really depends on the plantings. And I would say that mostly with shrubs and trees, we usually, not always, but usually will water in for at least their first summer and sometimes longer. Then other considerations for planting include placement and density. So how many do you need for a spot, and how close do you put them together? And a lot of that is really driven by, in a garden setting, more about aesthetics than any kind of like negative impact to a plant should you plant them closer together. With wildflowers, we plant them quite densely. So in our ecosystems here, our dry meadow ecosystems, our Gary Oak ecosystems, will plant up to about 20 of these small plants in about a meter, because some of them die back in the summer. And so what we're looking for is really nice coverage, and that'll become even denser as those set seed. Then sometimes with larger plants, you'll give them much more space. So a shrub, for example, you might give a meter, 2 meters, or even more in between them, depending on how much shade you want to create or what the function of the planting is. So a dense hedgerow, for example, you might plant densely. And then timing here is just related to watering, just talking about how if you plant fall or summer, it will impact when you will water, or if you will water, for example. So here's an example of a garden with a goal to create a garden for bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. So some of the things to think about in this example are using at least some native plants, planting in a way that produces pollen and nectar throughout the growing season, providing nesting habitat like wood cavities, bare soil, hollow stems, provide stability. So what I mean is if you, have provided nesting habitat, but you move them around all the time, that's not going to be as helpful as if you provided some habitat stability for these animals. Avoiding pesticide treated plants, maintaining existing natural areas, considering all the life phases of the organism that you're trying to promote. So that, for example, including host plants for butterflies. So host plants are the plants that the caterpillars eat and are often a bottleneck for butterflies. Including hummingbird-friendly plants, and considering composition, structure, and succession. So this is an example of if you're about to create a garden, you write out your goal and then list the things that will help you achieve your goal in your garden. Examples of diversity and composition on Southern Vancouver Island would be maybe planting shooting star and camas and helenium and lupins to promote a diversity of bee species. Thinking about structure, so here is an area with some bare soil for ground nesting bees and hollow stems for cavity nesting bees, and a beautiful hedgerow with wildflower plantings around it for diversity and structure and appeal to a diversity of animals. And succession is something that can be not only very aesthetic and beautiful in your garden, but also a feature of pollinator-friendly spaces. So succession, when you start, your outdoors and exploring your natural habitats and learning about when plants bloom. So taking photos or taking notes is a wonderful way to learn that. But then you start to plant your garden in a way where you can ensure continuous blooms across the season. So here we go from February all the way to October and ensure that we have something blooming. And an example of your hummingbird-friendly plantings, where we had said choose hummingbird-friendly plants, and these are all hummingbird-friendly plants in Victoria. And much the same, you would choose species that are native to your region. So Ecologia, here we have Formosa. If you're in Ontario, it would be Canadensis, I think. But that you would be thinking about often red, purple, and orange tubular flowers for hummingbirds. And in this case, our Annas and our Rufus really love mock orange as well, even though it has white flowers. But these beautiful clusters of plants close together that will ensure that you'll have hummingbirds coming and feasting to enjoy. And then for attracting butterflies, in our area, there's a handful of species that are really some of the most butterfly friendly plants. And these would be the kinds of things you would think about including in your garden space if those were the kinds of animals you wanted to have. So these are all butterflies that will come to Ocean Spray to lay their eggs. So you can be certain if you have even one of these shrubs as part of your planting that you've created a more butterfly friendly space. Nettle here is also extremely important. So these are all butterflies that lay their eggs on stinging nettle. And stinging nettle might not always be desirable in all planting spaces, but even in a planter or a shady corner in a garden that has a natural buffer, including species that you might not always think of as desirable, might actually help you achieve some of your goals. So for garden design, especially with wildlife friendly garden design, to keep an open mind and to think of different approaches that might help you create a beautiful garden with all the aesthetics you're after by just being a little bit creative. So in planting groups, when you're outside observing, what you're starting to do is almost like this multivariate or putting all these variables together in a way that is almost intangible. So you start to see what's growing together, you get a feel for the different moisture regimes and what to expect from the plant in terms of its growing habits and all of those things. And you can start to create planting groups that work really well in a garden setting. And so when I say ecological sensibility, I'm talking about mimicking natural assemblages of plants and then kind of like redoing that in a garden space. You also with plantings want to think about coverage across the seasons, and I'll show you an example of that. Of course, aesthetics. We all want, you know, beautiful plantings, especially near to homes or community gardens or on a balcony in a planter. Overlapping bloom times is related to that succession approach that we talked about. And of course, linking it all back to your goals, and then also just realism, like what is available, what is cost effective for you, what, you know, putting a budget together so you don't bite off more than you can chew. Maybe you just start with a very small patch and build out from that year to year, instead of thinking you need to take on a huge patch that overwhelms you and you back away from because you're just overwhelmed. So here's some local sort of assemblages of plants, like in nature here, where this is a common grouping. If you're out on a hike at this time of year, you'll see these species together. Western buttercup, white fawn lily, broadleaf shooting star, and chocolate lily. And here they are in a planting in a garden, and tremendously beautiful. You can see the density is really high, trying to create a density that is more like a natural meadow planting, and lots of different species, but not a crazy amount, and including not just forbs or wildflowers or herbs, but also including sedges, rushes, and grasses that are typical of these habitats too, to encourage the coverage, well, the beauty, but also the coverage across seasons. Here's another grouping. And of course, these aren't the same necessarily the same native species as to where you live, but be thinking about what are the groupings for your area. So I think nodding onion is quite widespread, but other native carrots, places where you might live, or other plants from the Asteraceae plant family, or grasses. And here's a planting. Part of the reason I put this picture in, I also wanted to comment on structure in gardens and placement. So here is woolly sunflower, lower growing, and then as we go back, we're increasing in height with the species. And this can be very visually appealing. And the other visually appealing thing I want you to take note of in this photo are the clusters. So we're planting in sort of these mini swaths here, and you can think about these approaches if it's an aesthetic that appeals to you. There's also lots of approaches that have a much more randomized planting, but in this case, these are quite organized and for a reason. And I'll just show you a late summer kind of assemblage. Part of the reason I wanted to show this is because yarrow and goldenrod and fireweed are very widespread. As you go east, your goldenrods become more species diverse. Here we just have Solidago lepida, but into the mountains, and then especially heading east, these become very species rich and make beautiful later season blooms. Something I would comment on here is that these more vigorous and taller species, planting vigorous plants with vigorous plants and less vigorous plants with less vigorous plants, can be helpful, especially in small spaces. So if you're hesitant to plant something like goldenrod or fireweed because you're worried about it impacting a garden space, you could think about it as including some of those plants in maybe a hedgerow planting or a cluster of their own, instead of thinking you need to overlap everything in a garden. And so the succession that we talked about, where we have blooms that grade into other blooms, doesn't all need to be in the exact same garden space. You can look at it on different scales. So you could have a few different patches with different plant communities in those patches that overall, in the context of your space, provide continuous floral resources. Annuals are something on southern Vancouver Island that we use in our plantings almost all the time. And they have an interesting phenology. So they drop their seed in the summer. That seed stays dormant during the hot, dry summer, but then it sprouts in fall. And so this right-hand picture is actually a winter photo in Victoria, where these lime green leaves are all this pink plant here, sea blush. And so this can help resist other weedy seeds in the soil, also helps hold moisture in the soil, and is beautiful. The lime green color, this photo really doesn't do it justice, but there's such an exquisite color with this ground cover, even when it's not in bloom. And likewise, perennial forbs can create greenery through the winter too. So think about maybe Fragaria or strawberries in your area. I think Cerastium is widespread as well, like this species here, field chickweed or Cerastium arvense. So this is in about 2 weeks or so, this is what it will look like. And in winter on the right-hand side, that's what it looks like. And it kind of browns up in the summer and then greens up with the fall rains. And depending where you are, more continental climate, you'll have different life histories for plants, but thinking and applying the same principles of trying to have different kinds of plants together that will help create some kind of coverage. So here's an example of a project. This is at Neathwa Child and Family Services Society on Sayote territory near Victoria on the Saanich Peninsula. And you can see that with this planting, we did gardens around a suite of buildings associated with Neathwa, and we made our species selection mostly based on light, but also some of the goals of the local Indigenous community who were partnered on with this. So we have lots of edible and medicinal plants that are part of these plantings and helped guide where the plantings went in this space too. So this is after a year of growing. We have bleeding hearts and red flowering currants and Oregon grape and a suite of other species. Over the course of the season, you'll see the ebbs and flows of this garden space. And that's something to always keep in mind with gardens. The plants aren't furniture. They're not plastic pieces that get sat out and stay the same all the time. They are living, they're very dynamic. Plants and nature are very cyclical in nature, and to embrace that part of your garden instead of trying to fight against it. And that sometimes is about reframing our ideas of beauty as well. So that could be looking at a seed head or a browned up grass in a different way than thinking that something's wrong with it or with your garden. So here's some of the sort of befores at Neathwa. Here's a strip in the parking area, and you can see within just a short time, really greening that up. So this is just a year later, and we've put coastal mugwort or sage here, different onion species, yarrow, woolly sunflower. And again, I have a tendency to plant quite densely. I really like dense plantings. But if that is an aesthetic that appeals to you, that's just fine. You can mulch around plantings or give them more space as well. So here's a mini meadow in the parking lot. So this is a diverse, rich patch of Garryoke ecosystem species in a small area, and you will see the different insects hopscotching even in a parking lot area. And of course, the beauty is fantastic. I think there's a light beam. Sorry, I wanted to. Here's a rain garden example. This is at Nice-Trois as well, but you can see this clay soil holding water, and instead of us modifying that, we embraced it. So the engineers cut the curb so that it comes down here, it pools in here, and then there is the drain here. But we get lots of standing water and have put a suite of wetland and wet meadow species in there. This is another rain garden. This is an urban rain garden with the town of View Royal near Victoria, or one of the townships of Victoria. And this is a large, almost together, the two rain garden strips are about 400 meters squared, and we were able to plant them with wetland and wet meadow species. And there's a lot of water in here in the winter, and then it dries up in the summer. And some of the considerations were having some of the lower growing vegetation up at the curb and keeping some of the taller vegetation down the center, and also just the maintenance of the garden space, making sure we take care of that space. So apologies, I see that the green roof photo here is blurry, but it gives you an idea of so much can be done with urban spaces and alternative spaces, including green roof areas. I really wish this one had been a little clearer for you, but this is a rich assemblage of wildflowers and grasses. Mosses have colonized here that are lovely. There's young sedums that are growing up, and lots of opportunities in all sorts of spaces like green roofs and rain gardens to do a variety of plantings. Here's a septic field. So this is a young septic field. This is a septic field in its first year, but meadow plants, so like tall grass prairie plants or Garryoke ecosystem plants and other wildflowers of open sunny spaces can make terrific plantings for septic fields. And we also, shady septic fields can be terrific, using woodland understories to inspire the plantings. And with wildflowers and grasses, your septic field is fine in terms of rooting depth. What you want to steer clear of are shrubs and trees, and also with any kind of site preparation you're doing to, it's usually advised to make sure that they're breathable and that you're not covering up the septic field in black plastic smothering vegetation or things like that. You have to be a little gentler, but certainly including wildflower bulbs and other kinds of wildflowers can be really beautiful and an alternative to just grass on the field. So I'll show you, I know we're getting close on time here, so we'll wrap up somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. So we have lots of time for questions, but I do have some more slides to share, so hang in there with me. But sometimes people really want to do more than add a few plants into a garden space, and really are looking for a big transition. And so we work with people on lawn to meadow conversions, and this is where we're removing lawn grass and replacing it with native meadow vegetation. And these are examples of that, where these folks have decided to take out lawn and then seed and or plant native plants as an alternative, and creating these biodiversity rich, pollinator rich habitats that are also stunning. And boulevards, much the same as these lawn to meadow conversions, just different jurisdiction in a sense, but a lot of the same meadow species can be applied to boulevards. And again, I had mentioned about referring to your boulevard guidelines, but there's some cases with boulevards where you can include trees and shrubs. It just depends on your municipality and making sure your sight lines and such are that you're not negatively impacting sidewalks or the road and vehicles and all that kind of stuff. And we did look at the picture where I mentioned about clusters or swath planting, but here are a few more examples of that, showing how you know, these different aesthetics, you can really become the artist in your own garden space. And don't be afraid of trying things out and then changing your mind. It's totally fine. It's not, you know, set in stone. When you put a plant in the garden, it's okay to move them around. It's okay to totally, you know, try things out and realize, oh, that doesn't work, and learn from it and try something else. And not to be afraid just to dive in and try different things based on what you do know, and then you can just adapt things later. And plants change all the time anyway, so sometimes these changes won't even be in your control. So just to wrap things up, here are all images of plants when they're not in full flower in different seasons, and have these beautiful colors of purple and amber and whites and different colors of brown. And that to appreciate your spaces at all times of year, maybe they're under snow or saturated in water, and you just have one flower head poking above the water or something like that. But to, you know, have realistic expectations for working with native plants and garden spaces in general, and that takes patience. It means that you're respecting native plants for really what they are, instead of imposing on them what we have been with cultivars and cultivar driven gardens, where we, you know, just kind of have become used to a way of gardening that isn't as good for nature, and we're trying to sort of change the way we're gardening for a good reason. And that means we also have to change our worldviews associated with gardens and our landscaping approaches. And awareness, and that's about your self-education. That's about those hikes that you go on, or learning about the nature around you to help you learn how to make a beautiful garden with native plants. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and we've got lots of time for questions, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
I really did. That was fantastic. Thank you. And I saw so many great comments in the chat too. And yeah, that was great information. Beautiful pictures, a real feast for the eyes, and so clearly shared what you had to tell us. So thank you very much. And thanks to our participants. I love that people are always so friendly and sharing and helpful. So that's really, really nice. Okay, so let's get to as many questions as we can. And just a reminder to those who hopped on late, there will be a Zoom email that will go out in a few days. So just hang tight, that will be coming to all of you. And I'll give you links also for our native plant encyclopedia and our native plant supplier list, because while I hope those of you who are local to Satin Flower Nurseries can support Kristen's wonderful work, if you're not in the area, then there are other ones on our list that perhaps you could also support that are very dedicated people to this area. Although Kristen, you have a course too, don't you? Meadow Makers that I saw online. So I'm not sure if that's applicable to people in your area or if it's that broader range. I'm not sure, but
It's It's fairly localized, I would say. Sometimes we have folks in Washington and Oregon. There's been some from Seattle, like this year, there's someone from Seattle. And then across the island, but it is fairly localized. But if you're a person who's like tonight, where, you know, the examples that are being shared are local, but the principles are broader. But with Meadow Makers, there are field trips, so it's kind of tricky.
That is a local thing. People want to join into that. Yeah, check it out online. Okay, so for the questions, we have hundreds of deer around. What flowering bushes will the deer leave alone?
Yes, that deer. So where is that person writing from? Do they say?
It doesn't say.
Oh, that's okay. So in whatever region you're in, rest assured that there are some native species that are deer resistant. So in general, deer do not find grasses, sedges, rushes palatable. And there's always a suite of magnificent grasses that sometimes get overlooked because we're used to grasses being a certain way, like becoming overly vigorous or things like that. But many regions have beautiful bunch grasses that you can think about using in your plantings, and deer don't find them palatable. And then there are a suite of especially in the aster plant family and some other aromatic herbs that are not as palatable to deer typically. So in this photo, this pearly everlasting is an example of a deer resistant species. We looked at pictures of woolly sunflower in this presentation, but yarrow is deer resistant, and there are others too. So if you have a nursery close to you, a native plant nursery, or even a Google search about native plants in your area and try to see if you can find what is deer resistant. But I encourage you to look. And I know that it can be challenging with deer, but you can put together a suite of plants and hopefully find something that works for you.
Sure. And again, across the country, there's master gardeners and horticultural societies, field naturalist clubs. We have the Native Plant Encyclopedia that you can search. If you choose the detailed tabs, you can search that. So yeah, thank you. Okay. And I think we have a link on our website too with a list as a starting point too, which we can send out as well. Thank you. Does your nursery do mail order sales of seeds or plants? And this person's in Vancouver, but that would apply to other people too.
Yeah, so we not of potted plants, but of seeds. Okay. And then for folks in Vancouver, for potted plants, Plan B Native Plants is really good. Nat's Nursery, Coast Salish Plant Nursery. So there's opportunities to pick up potted plants, and then for seeds, we do lots of seeds, and then we can help whittle down what might work well for Vancouver. Vancouver gets about double the rainfall we do, so Vancouver has quite a different vegetation there, but some overlapping species, but here is quite dry.
Okay. And then do they only handle plants and seeds for that region? If so, do they know who to contact for the East Kootenay Cranbrook region? Thank you, Jen. I think you probably
Kinseed would be the first website I would go to for the Kootenay region. So KINSEED. So Brenda Beckwith and Valerie Huff co-own Kinseed, and they're doing native seeds for the Kootenay region and potted plants. And if you can't find what you want there, they'll have really good recommendations for that region.
Thank you. This is great working together. Such a big help. Thank you. I'm not sure if this is something you can answer. It's a little but a tangent. How did the salmon and other sea life influence the forests and plains in Metchosin and the wider area? And how is that relationship today, considering salmon have become endangered, as have the water bodies? I'm not sure if that's something that
there's a strong literature on how salmon influence coastal forests and riparian areas. When at that interface where salmon are brought into surrounding habitat by, say, bears moving salmon in, those nutrient inputs into the forest really do accumulate through time and make a big difference to forest health and tree growth and tree growth rates and things like that. And I don't know what studies are available showing a decline in those nutrient inputs from declines in salmon exactly. I just know about those correlations, those positive correlations between salmon and forest health, but it is very important. And of course, salmon are important for food and culture here, and just their inherent worth, of course, but I don't know how to answer that question at depth.
Thank you for that. And Lynn is asking, I have a large septic bed that was installed too shallowly. The bed is in full sun. Applications of topsoil, organic material, and compost disappear into the septic bed sand within 2 years. Little will grow over the septic bed. What native plants might grow in these conditions? Zone 5A in Ontario.
Yeah, unfortunately, I won't be able to tell you exactly what plants to grow because of just my I'm not familiar enough with the region, but that we too here have especially with new septic constructions that are often overlain with sand or have a big sand deposit. So even if organics are added on top, those particles are leaching through over fairly short periods of time, and water is pulled away quite quickly through the layers. And where we have fast water moving quickly or just a lot of sand, we've been doing sometimes species that are more sand associated species. So like, I think Ontario would have Armeria species or sea thrift species would be an example, but to look towards species that do well in sand, I'll bet yarrow does quite well in sand. So things like that, but looking for a habitat analog that might work well, like a plant community where you can make a kind of like a connection. So well drained, look for a plant community that's well drained or sand associated, and maybe experiment a little bit, like try a few plants that you have thought might work and then see how they do over the season.
Okay, thank you. And then someone's asking, what is your zone where you are?
They mean like the 5A and
I think so.
I don't know. I like, if I'm being, I know that might sound crazy and you might think I know nothing about plants because I don't know that, but I've never
I always have to stop and
attention to that, and I know those things exist, but I don't know.
Okay, and we can look on a map because we have actually a map on our website, so I can include that link.
I know all like the horticultural folks and the master gardeners and stuff. There's probably someone in here who's one of the local master gardeners who would be able to tell you.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
we're very our habit or our climate, and like it's all related to geography and also people history here, but we have very arid summers and fairly mild winters, like quite mild winters. We're semi-Mediterranean. So it very rarely snows. Like if it's -4, people are freaking out. So, and then these very sharp arid summers. So sometimes we'll quite literally go 4 months without rain, like any rain, like not a drop.
Wow.
So it's quite dry overall. Yeah, and for our average July precipitation in Victoria, it's the driest in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah.
Quite neat. I've never heard it described as semi-Mediterranean either. That's makes it sound quite.
Yeah, because when people think of the coast of BC, they think rainforest, and within just like the precipitation changes dramatically between here and just a few hours away. We're just in this very concentrated rain shadow here of the Olympic mountain range that we just don't get the rainfall, and so we have this different assemblage of plants. But that doesn't add, that's a long-winded, I just don't know. So
Well, I'll send a link to the zone map that we have.
I'm humbled.
And actually, the next question is, what is a good resource to find out which plants support which insect and animal species? Example, which plants attract hummingbirds? And I'd love for you to share any resources that you know of. The encyclopedia that I mentioned, if you do the detailed search, it will help you with that and give you ideas. But if you have any thoughts on that, Kristen?
Yeah, I agree with you completely that would be one of the first places to go. And then depending on where you are, but Pollinator Partnership Canada has tremendous resources with ecological planting guides for regions across the country.
Yeah.
So I would strongly encourage that as like another step in the right direction. So they're terrific. So you would look up the plant, if you just Google Planting Guide, Pollinator Partnership Canada.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and CanPlant is another good one, although they've changed the name again recently, but that was Evergreen's database, which is quite a nice one to search.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I'll see if I can include the link to that one in too for the Pollinator Partnership. They are very good. Any tips, tricks, or advice for successful moss growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, we haven't been able to, we've tried some funny things, you like grind moss up and then you put yogurt and you like spray it on things. I don't know. It probably, like, I haven't experimented properly with that, but I bet you could do it. We've been at some restoration sites where we've transplanted moss, and that's been successful. But anytime you're moving any kind of flora around, you want to be really paying close attention to plant ethics and harvesting ethics when you're doing things like that, and do no harm. So those have been exceptions and have been done in a thoughtful way. So you don't want to just like grab moss off a local rock face or anything like that. Like, you've got to be careful. But then I showed you a green roof example that's covered in moss, and that just happened naturally because of the watering that was going on in combination with some of the shading going on around it. And it just got inoculated naturally, and then the moist conditions, and it just built up a population of moss. In some areas there are, and I don't know if this occurs across the country or not, but in our area, sometimes when there is development and habitat is lost or going to be lost, there are some nonprofit organizations who help bridge the developers with people who can use native plants, and people can go dig out plants at these places that are going to be destroyed. And so sometimes moss mats, because we have a very like rich moss flora here, and so there are actually these like huge expanses of mosses with wildflowers, and are some of the most sensitive habitat types. So if there's going to be a new condo or something, sometimes people are transplanting these whole moss mats. So I don't know if there's plant salvage opportunities in other regions. I would guess there probably are, but that could be also a place to think about for moss. But I love moss, so that's nice that people are like, that's like open-minded and celebrating your local ecology. It's awesome.
Well, it's like slow down and smell the roses. Well, slow down and gently, touch the moss.
Yeah, stroke the mosses.
Yeah.
Smell the roses and stroke the mosses.
Yeah. Someone's asking, does the integrity of native plants degrade season after season by being planted among non-native plants?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think if you have a garden where you have non-native plants that are non-invasive, that it can be a beautiful mix of plants and there are still ecological benefits. And it definitely does not be like, you don't need to just have native plants to have some of the benefits of native plants. And I haven't seen native plants for the most part, or just generally decline in the presence of non-invasive plants in a garden setting. There are some native species that have very specialized relationships, like mycorrhizal relationships, where you can't just have any old native plant in the soil. But that's part of how, if you're purchasing from a plant nursery, some of those plants are already screened out because they're being propagated in a nursery environment. But I think, yeah, I can't think of an example where I would say that, like, the planting of a native plant from like a nursery setting into a garden space with non-native plants where it degraded the native plant.
Okay, thanks. One last question, then we're going to have to wrap this up. Again, I'm not sure where this person's coming from, but they're asking what sedums are native as per your comments. I don't know if you know of any sedums in general that are native to your area or Canada. But...
Yeah, there's a few. So sedum spatulifolium, sedum lanceolatum and there's also sedum oregonum. So most common is typically sedum spatulifolium broadleaf stone crop, where it has the broad leaves that can be just infinitely colorful. You can have everything from like a whitey green all the way to a deep winey red. So just amazing foliage, and then these bright yellow striking flowers. So they're lovely plants, and they are evergreen and extremely drought tolerant. But I hope that helps.
Thank you. So many cool plants to discover and play with. But so it's time to wrap it up. Someone's asking. There's so many questions left, but we are going to have to stop. I know people really wanted their questions answered. What I'll do is I'll go through the questions in the chat after, and if there's anything that I can put in the email as links and resources to help, I will definitely do that. So they're not, just because we're ending now doesn't mean I'm going to totally forget them. I'll have a look and see what we can address. But
yeah. And hopefully we can have another webinar sometime. And if you're in our area, please come out to the nursery. And if you're not in our area, try to find your local native plant nurseries and pay them a visit. And
yes, and I have heard from people in the industry that us as consumers, letting nurseries know what we want and using our shopping power to also back that up is shifting things. There are more and more people that are taking the plunge and growing native plants because it is an investment. They're perennials. You need to plan ahead and have all the logistics around it. So it really is working. It really matters. So as you say, support your local nurseries, the native plant ones, as much as possible. And yeah, so I'm going to wrap it up now. And thank you very much, Kristen, for.
Thank you so much. I've had a really lovely time and really appreciate this so much. It's a real honor to get to partner with you. And I think you do tremendous work, and I can't wait to hear more of the recordings from past speakers like the Lorraine Johnson talk. I gotta get in there.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for your participation and showing up tonight. That was awesome. And watch out for the follow-up email in a few days and for upcoming webinars that we have for the rest of the spring. So thank you. Take care.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.